morning, everybody. Welcome to InterActions LA. It's the Lewis Center's annual spring conference. Usually we're in downtown, but of course for lingering COVID reasons, we've been holding these conferences on Zoom. Today, I'm really excited to be talking about inclusive approaches to electric car sharing. I'm Evelyn Blumenberg. I'm director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies here at UCLA in the Luskin School of Public Affairs. And I'm going to be moderating the first part of this event, and then I'm going to turn things over to Madeline Brosen, the deputy director of the center, who's going to close us out. We are going to move to the next slide. Okay, so before we get started, I want to acknowledge the Gabrielina Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of the Tavongar, the Los Angeles Basin, and Southern Channel Islands. As a land grant institution, we pay our respects to the Honukvatan, Hihirom, and Iohinkem, past, present, and emerging. So we have a great lineup of speakers this morning, and you're definitely going to want to engage with them. So please use the Q&A windows to submit your questions and also to vote and comment on the questions of others. Keep an eye on the chat window. If your question is selected, you may be asked to pose it directly to the speaker, or I may be orchestrating the Q&A. But please engage with the Q&A so we can make sure that we get all your questions and your answered and your comments as well. So this slide is a preview of our agenda this morning, so you know how this will flow. We've started with this already. We're next going to turn to opening remarks, first by Seleta Reynolds, General Manager of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, and then I'm going to make a few remarks before we turn it over to our expert panel, and I'll introduce those folks in a minute. Then we'll have a moderated discussion with Q&A from you all. And then finally, we're going to close things out by looking at industry trends and next steps with Creighton Randall, who is CEO, principal consultant of the Mobility Development Group. And then, as I mentioned, Maddie Brosen will bring the event to a close. So the title for this event this morning is Inclusive Approaches to Electric Car Sharing. So when we're talking about car sharing, we're talking about short-term car rentals where you only pay for the automobility that you use. There's a focus on clean vehicles as part of these programs as well. And our focus, of course, is the inclusive nature of these programs, incentive programs in disadvantaged communities that provide reduced or free service. Okay, so I want to turn the Zoom microphone over to Seleta Reynolds. As I mentioned, Seleta is General Manager of LADOT and very forward-looking with respect to a host of transportation issues, including equity and shared mobility. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn things over to Seleta.
Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to have a couple of minutes here at the top of this really exciting program and agenda. I am very, very proud of the work that we have done at LADOT with a lot of partners, many of whom are here on the panel or are participating today, and just want to reflect back on the last 7 years of work to try and bring the Blue LA EV car sharing program to the city of LA. We're about a decade into California's climate investments, and we wouldn't have gotten here without incredible advocates like Greenlining Institute and dedicated staff at CARB and researchers at UCLA and Davis and community partners like Self-Help Enterprises and industry practitioners like Mobility Development And the team that I have at LADOT, I am only as successful as the team that is actually on the ground doing the work. And I want to shout out in particular Chief Sustainability Officer Marcel Porras and his team, including Anita Tang and Sharon Sardpour. The difference between success and failure in any innovative undertaking inside government, in my experience, is the person managing it a splitter, or are they a joiner? And there is no better collaborator and joiner than Marcel Porras. If you know him, you know that to be true. He can see the forest and the trees, and he builds relationships and coalitions, which is really what it takes to change the paradigm and to change the outcomes that we get in transportation. And I think institutions like UCLA are really training and creating and inspiring and supporting the next generation of leaders for this work. And so I'm very grateful to support this program and UCLA's ongoing work. Just a few lessons learned from 7 years of doing the EV car sharing program, Blue LA. First of all, there is absolutely a role for the government to think of ourselves as really something that's a little bit of a dirty word in the business world, but I think is really important for us to consider in the public sector, which is to think of ourselves as activist investors. There is $30 million more of clean mobility money coming. There's $419 million in the governor's 4-year plan for CARB in the next, in the near future. The resources that we have are unprecedented, but we will not see different outcomes unless we step into the breach and insist that we include equity built into program design, either by regulation or by investment, and that we do not abdicate our role as regulators, and that we find those levers that allow us to insist upon equitable outcomes. Blue LA has 60% of, historically 60% of its members using community memberships, which means they're qualifying low-income users, and 100% of those stations are in communities that have suffered from historic disinvestment by the public sector. But just putting the infrastructure in is expensive and it's challenging, but it is not enough. And you have to make sure that you are constantly holding the private partners accountable every step of the way, because electric vehicles is a startup industry, make no mistake. It is still very much that way, no matter what certain billionaires who want to buy Twitter say to the contrary. You're still in a volatile sort of industry, in a volatile space. So you also have to be comfortable with uncertainty, while still insisting on certain outcomes. We've gone through, initial vendor and then a sale of that vendor, acquisitions, and all of those other things. Those become part of this work if we're going to leapfrog some of the failed models of tech-enabled mobility that we've seen in the last decade and get to outcomes, models that really meet the goals that we have around equity and climate. We really connect our role as to creating access to opportunity. And that's kind of the North Star that we have. And we have to approach that with a tremendous amount of humility. I remember being on a panel and hearing about Dr. Blumenberg's research, and shame on me for not being aware of it before that, but several years ago, really it hitting home that in particular for women and BIPOC women and zero vehicle households, access to a car is essential. And we exacerbate existing inequities when our climate conversation only focuses on the need for people to drive less. And what that means is that we really have to think about, is it possible to divorce auto access from auto ownership and still help people achieve the outcomes that they have for their lives, in particular around economic mobility? So the work that lies ahead is really exciting. It's really challenging, and not one single sector is going to be able to do it alone. And so I'm really excited to learn more today about what's going on in more rural areas beyond LA, and how we can look towards models that encourage us to think beyond able-bodied folks who have driver's licenses and transportation options that really work for people who have been left behind and are not able to realize the dividend from our investments in the mobility system that belongs to them. So, and then the last piece, we're wondering if lightning can strike twice, pun intended, with our new investments in e-bike libraries. And how can those things begin to complement other transit and transportation options that are available, both through the physical infrastructure that we build, but the availability of the fleets themselves and the skills training needed to repair and keep those fleets operable, as well as being able to use those bikes for people of all ages and abilities and skill levels. So with that, thanks again for having me, and I'm really excited and looking forward to the program.
Thanks so much, Seleta. And I think that Seleta has thrown down the challenge for all of us. I really like the challenge of how we go about being activist investors and taking advantage of some of the resources that are available to these sorts of programs, equity and car sharing programs in the state at this moment. So we can think about how we engage with the rest of our speakers this morning with that sort of perspective in mind. I'm going to share my screen again. Seleta was a great setup. I do, as the sort of academic in the group, I want to just root us in just a couple of general thoughts about equity and car sharing. Seleta referred to this, so I want to just present a tiny little piece of data on income, race, and household automobile ownership, and we'll talk a little bit about expenditures, and then talk just generally about the potential benefits of car sharing for both households and to cities and regions. And I'll do this, and then we'll segue into the panel for this morning. So these are national data on income and racial disparities in automobile ownership. And so you can see, I'm not going to go through this graph in great detail because I only have a few minutes here, but you can certainly see that there are high percentages of low income and non-white households that have either no household vehicle, so those are the part of the bar that's in black, or fewer vehicles than drivers, and that's the gray part of the bar as well. And so you can very clearly see the relationship between income and race and the ability to have a car if and when you need a vehicle. There's a large and growing body of scholarship that focuses on the relationship between cars and an array of improved outcomes. And this is, as Seleta mentioned, particularly important for women who, as you know, have very complicated lives balancing both work and other household responsibilities, which makes for very complicated trip making. But it's true across a whole variety of disadvantaged households and families as well. And so that's what this sort of schematic represents, this sort of relationship between automobiles and positive outcomes, and in part because our automobiles provide benefits relative to other modes. So shorter travel times, the ease of making multiple trips, again, particularly important for women, potentially more predictable arrival times, and improved carrying capacity. So passengers and cargo, for example, the ability to make a large grocery trip, carry those large packages of things from Costco or whatnot. So, one response, if you go back to this graph, you say, okay, one response is, well, let's adopt a lot of policies to help low income households purchase and operate vehicles. And there are some of those programs. But of course, we're concerned about cars for some of the reasons that are on this cartoon on the left around obesity and global warming, and of course, feelings of extreme rage and frustration. And for lower income households, of course, one huge problem is how expensive automobiles are. And they impose a very high transportation expenditure sort of burden. So households struggle. If they desperately need a car, they'll purchase that car, and they really sort of struggle with the expense of the vehicle, both the purchase, the maintenance, and the operating costs as well. And then you can see in the box, certainly there's a host of other sort of negative sort of costs associated with automobiles and driving. So low-income car sharing has a potential role to play, of course. It provides auto access without ownership, which is something that Seleta just mentioned, which is sort of so true. It allows drivers to pay for only the automobility that they use. So keep in mind, one of my colleagues talks a lot about cars spend most of their time parked, not moving around. So here, drivers or households pay for only the automobility that they use. And there's an opportunity to travel and, in a vehicle in a cleaner way as well. And that's where certainly the electric piece of this comes in. So, it means a lot for households in terms of gaining access to opportunities and potentially sort of lowering their expenditure burden on transportation. And these sorts of programs also have potential benefits to cities and regions. And so I'm just going to run through these sort of quickly. For some of the reasons that I just mentioned, right? Car sharing can contribute to having a more robust local economy. Workers can get to jobs, employers can attract workers, and low-income households have additional resources to spend on other goods and services that they would otherwise have spent on their automobile. There's a question about the effects of these programs on overall vehicle miles of travel. So maybe this is something that our panelists want to weigh in on. So we need to think about sort of the net effect of increased driving among low-income zero-vehicle households who desperately need that vehicle to make some trips. And there's also potentially fewer miles put on their vehicles by other households. I mentioned the increased travel in clean fuel vehicles. And so, one thing is that it may enable lower income households to retire older, gross polluting vehicles and switch to clean electric vehicles. But also it may perhaps build increased comfort with the use of electric vehicles in general. Car sharing might increase travel by other modes. So if you're only paying for the automobility that you need, you may take some trips by automobile and some trips on foot, on transit, on a bike. And then, these sorts of programs will increase investments in electric charging infrastructure in low-income neighborhoods as well, and address this relationship between race and income and charging deserts. So thanks to Madeline Brosen for assembling this map. And if you know of other low-income electric car share programs across the country that we haven't captured here, please send them our way. But you could see some of these programs on this map. And you can also clearly note, you don't need sophisticated analytics to note the concentration of programs in California, but also, sort of here in Southern California as well. And so today we have an opportunity to talk in greater detail about these programs, you know, with a focus on LA, Sacramento, the San Joaquin Valley, and San Pedro. And here you can get a sense of the actual vehicles involved in these programs. And there we go. Okay. So with that, I would like to turn things over to our great lineup of sort of panelists. They are going to briefly introduce their programs, and I'm going to start by introducing them in the order that they're going to sort of speak. So first will be Sparky Harris, who is the principal planner for the city of Sacramento. Second in line is Abigail Solis, who's the manager of the Sustainable Energy Solutions Department at Self-Help Enterprises. Third will be Carolyn Rodier, who's a researcher with the UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies. And then we'll have Carla Velasco, is a community relations specialist at the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. So they've been coached to have about 5 minutes to introduce their programs. And then as I mentioned, I'm going to kind of kick things off by asking them a set of questions and then open it up to you all. So let me stop sharing here and turn things over to Sparky.
Thank you, Evelyn. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you very much for having me on the panel today. This is especially cool for me. I'm an alum of UCLA's Graduate School of Architecture and Urban Planning, which preceded the school that's currently there. I just want to talk a little bit about the program and hopefully be available for all of your questions. So just a little bit of context. Sacramento is a city of just over 500,000 residents, and I'm one of a handful of planners at the city that focus on transportation planning issues. We started experimenting with car share a little over 10 years ago. And it started really with a small, simple pilot with Zipcar. They deployed 10 gas-powered vehicles in the central city. Initially, it was a 2-year pilot with options to renew, which we did several times. And just based on that experience, we noticed that utilization showed really good potential for car share in Sacramento, but at the time we had no standards available to really launch a full and robust program. So we started working on that about 5 years ago. The Air District, or the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District, also had the same idea and actually beat us to the starting line by launching a program called Our Community Car Share in 2017 that served 300 members at 3 different affordable housing developments using cap and trade funding. And by then, we knew that Volkswagen was going to have to invest $800 million in California for EV adoption as part of the whole diesel, what do they call it? Dieselgate, I guess. But all of that motivated us to kind of kick our development into high gear for our car share parking permits, which we completed that process in 2019. And we also developed the terms and conditions for car share operations the same year. And around that same time, Sacramento was chosen to become the first green city by Electrify America, which is the charging infrastructure investment arm of VW. And really what that meant was that the city was teed up to receive $44 million for investments in EV infrastructure, EV car share, EV outreach, and also some EV buses. Following that designation, GIG was selected as the EV car share provider under that scenario. And up until that point, Gig had only previously operated in the East Bay with hybrid vehicles, but has since expanded not only to Sacramento, but also to Seattle to fill a void that was left when their previous car share provider pulled out. So for Sacramento, Gig purchased 260 Chevy Bolts to service a 15 square mile home zone that was developed collaboratively with the city. Just to put that in perspective, the entire footprint of the city of Sacramento is about 100 square feet, so they're around 50% of the city. This made Sacramento just overnight the largest all-electric free-floating car share program in the nation. And fast forward 3 years, the system has generated over 5 million EV miles since that inception. Now, as part of their operations, Gig doesn't discount their rates for anyone. They don't have a low-income membership discount or anything like that, but they have partnered with us in the past to do programs, one of which is called Gig for Good, which I'm very impressed with. Gig for Good provided dedicated Gig cars to about, I believe it was 8 of our local organizations, beginning right before COVID, but actually became very helpful during COVID. They provided dedicated vehicles to these organizations to help with their operations. And they also offered free trips for members to go and get their COVID vaccinations, which we were very happy that they were willing to do. I'm currently working with Gig to expand that our community car share program with some funding that we recently received from the California Energy Commission. And also wanted to mention that the original agreement was only for 3 years, which is about to expire in 60 days. But every indication that Gig has given us is that they will continue their operations in Sacramento beyond July of this year. Gig car share has really become, in my opinion, a vital component of our transportation ecosystem in Sacramento, and we're really working hard to make sure that they stick around. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to the next panelist.
Abigail, great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you and appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about what we are doing with MioCar. So before I start, I will introduce Self-Help and introduce myself. Self-Help Enterprises is an affordable housing and community development organization. Our mission is to work together with low-income families to build and sustain healthy homes and communities. We're located in the San Joaquin Valley, and our service area is comprised of 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley, and we've been working alongside residents since 1965. I am the manager of the Sustainable Energy Solutions Department, and my team really focuses on connecting under-resourced communities to affordable, renewable energy options, as well as clean transportation. So I'm excited to be here this morning to talk to you about MioCar, the San Joaquin Valley's first and only car sharing network. So a little bit about MioCar. We currently have 27 electric vehicles, and those vehicles are located in affordable housing properties in 6 rural communities in Tulare and Kern County. 3 of those communities are outside of the city of Visalia, and the other 3 are outside of the city of Bakersfield. So MioCar is really meant to be an affordable program. So MioCar charges $4 per hour, a maximum of $35 per day during the week, $45 during the weekend, and anything over 150 miles, there's a 35-cent per mile surcharge. So MioCar is membership based, and anyone who is over the age of 21 years old with a clean driving record, a credit card, or the credit card can also be prepaid, can become a member of MioCar. Similar to Uber and Lyft, MioCar is based on a smartphone app. So a physical location, a business storefront is not needed. And for MioCar, we had some great partners. We worked together with MPOs in Tulare and Kern County, transit agencies, and also, of course, mobility development and UC Davis. So Self-Help's role in this program was twofold. The first one is we are the host site for most MioCars. That means that the vehicles are located at our multifamily affordable housing properties. So there we provide a space to park the vehicle as well as electric vehicle charging stations to connect the cars. The other role that we had is we led the community outreach and training for the launch of the program. So before I talk more about MioCar, I just want to talk about the San Joaquin Valley for those that are not as familiar. We in the San Joaquin Valley are surrounded with mostly small unincorporated towns. Most of those are designated as disadvantaged communities. And it's because they're dealing with several issues like high energy costs, contaminated drinking water, and of course, air pollution. We are surrounded by farmland and communities are very spaced out from each other. This means that usually there's a longer commute time to get to work, to school, medical appointments, or any errand that a family needs to run. This is particularly challenging for families who only have one vehicle, and maybe, usually it is the wife or the mother that stays home without access to a car. So because most communities are not walkable, it makes it really important to have access to reliable transportation. It is really critical for getting from one place to another. And the other thing I want to highlight is that most people know that in the Central Valley, we have some of the worst air, most polluted air in the state. The effects of greenhouse gas emissions disproportionately impact low-income communities and people of color. And many of them are suffering from negative health impacts such as chronic respiratory diseases, especially in the San Joaquin Valley. So knowing all of this and how important it was, to ensure that the launch was successful, we took a very non-traditional approach to our community outreach and marketing. And we understood that often the residents in our communities are unfamiliar with new technologies. And we really focused on the barriers that keep residents and families from participating in these types of programs. And as a result, I think that our work really highlighted the importance of community engagement, partnerships, and the value of using trusted community-based organizations in car sharing programs and others like that. I'll just end by noting that for the communities that have MioCar, it definitely helps to fill the transportation gap and to augment public transportation. However, there are many more communities across the San Joaquin Valley that do not yet have access to MioCar or a similar program. The majority of small disadvantaged communities in the San Joaquin Valley do not have one charging station. These communities are in need of additional transportation options. And in order to achieve true equity, we have to get to a place where all residents have equal access to reliable transportation, to shared mobility. Self-Help Enterprises is committed to working together with disadvantaged community residents and other partners, many of which are on today, to reach our clean energy goals and really make clean and transportation and shared mobility a reality for many more communities in the near future. So I'm excited to talk more about our program as we get to the question and answer portion of the panel. Thank you.
Caroline?
Hi there. Hi, I am Caroline Rodier, and I'm a researcher at the University of California at Davis. I have been involved in this project since about 2013. I was the lead researcher in a community-based planning study that was initiated by the San Joaquin Valley Transportation Agencies and funded by Caltrans. The project started in 2013. The Valley wanted to develop a path to increase access and reduce greenhouse gases in rural areas where transit service is poor. Frequently in many of those communities, as Abigail mentioned, they may only have 2 intercity transit trips per day, which makes it very difficult to accomplish activities. For example, going to medical services and things like that. Many times people cannot get home in the same day. So the study identified transport disadvantaged communities in the Valley, compared shared mobility service concepts, and developed community partners. It culminated in a consensus about promising pilot options that could be implemented. MEOCAR was ultimately funded by the California Climate Investment Fund and local agencies. Once the project was funded, I played an initial role as a program manager and really helping to secure a car sharing provider and installation of EVSE. Subsequently, I led the evaluation of the pilot with my UC Davis colleagues. The MEOCAR pilot launched in 2013, and we are just about to publish 2 reports at the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis. I can share some of the headlines with you today really quickly. Most of the members of the program fall into low-income categories. For those who are familiar, the 3 HUD low-income categories that are below the median for a region. And so this is basically 69% of members are in that category. And then most of the low income, the people who fall into the low income categories are actually in the lowest category, the extremely low income category, 46%. So we feel that the program is really serving, the population that we intended the service to help. Low income members, we see, are also accessing new destinations and traveling more as a result of the program. Most members, 76%, are making new VMT and by low income members. And I would argue that this is good VMT. And just as Evelyn discussed today, people, we need to allow lower income people or people who have been marginalized in different communities to access opportunities. And it appears that this program is making that happen. Higher income members are contributing most to GHG reductions by substituting electric vehicle travel for conventional vehicle travel. All this while supporting the financial sustainability of the service. 65% of the VMT is attributed to high income members who are substituting electric vehicle travel for conventional vehicles. So overall for the program, we found a 24% VMT, 24%, of the program VMT substituted electric vehicle travel for conventional vehicle travel. 54% of program VMT is new VMT that could not have been made without the availability of the service, according to post-reservation surveys of our members. We have also seen about a 20% reduction in vehicle ownership among our memberships, which we were quite surprised about. So that is it for me. If you have any questions. Oh, no questions yet, sorry. Okay.
Questions soon.
Okay.
But not quite yet.
Okay.
Let's turn things over to Carla.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Carla Velasco, and it is a pleasure to be here. I'm a community relations specialist at the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. I'm here to talk about our EV car share program that has been in operation since 2021 at our Rancho San Pedro public housing site. Our electric vehicle program is exclusively available to our residents at Ranchos and not open to the public for rental. We currently have 2 Nissan lease vehicles that are available for booking on site with our own charging station. Our program service provider and partner Envoy are in charge of leasing the vehicles, operating customer service, and running maintenance for the cars. During the time this was only a pilot program, the team quickly figured out that the $9 an hour flat fee that Envoy charges was going to be too expensive for our residents that primarily have low income socioeconomic status. LA Clean Tech Incubator, that had been our partner at the pilot stage of the program, agreed to award subsidy so that the fee for residents would decrease to $3 an hour. My main role in community engagement is to manage a self-sufficiency program called the Community Coach Program, which is comprised of 8 community or resident leaders that were awarded a monthly stipend to outreach, engage, and educate the residents at Rancho about the use of the EV cars. So this included helping us coordinate outreach events, flyering information on the program at the site, and providing us with feedback from the residents. And I look forward to further sharing my experience in the discussion today. Thank you.
Great, thanks to all of you. And you can, I'm going to ask you all some questions. You can turn on your cameras, all of you, for this panel sort of format. Okay, and first, I've been kind of following the chat as well. I think it's so easy to get caught up in whatever the lingo is of your profession. So someone asked a question about VMT, which is vehicle miles of travel. So how many miles are people putting on their vehicle? So for those of you who don't know, that's what we're talking about when we talk about VMT. So I'm going to start by asking a question that builds on the Abigail and Carla's comments about sort of community outreach and the ways in which the programs did outreach to the community, both in the setup of the program, but also in getting the community engaged in using the services. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Abigail, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I can start and then Carla can add.
Perfect.
I'll start by saying that our team at Self-Help Enterprises has a long history of doing community outreach and engaging with the community. So we knew from the beginning of the program that often residents are not familiar with new technologies like electric vehicles, charging stations, and an app-based approach, right? So taking that into consideration, we decided to really have a personal face-to-face approach to our community outreach. So we held multiple enrollment events at our affordable housing sites where we can talk to people in person and actually help them through the process. Many folks who were interested in signing up had never downloaded an app before, weren't really sure how to do that part of it. So we had our team there available to assist with this piece of it. And the other barrier that is usually gets in the way with these kind of programs is that people are often reluctant to try, to drive a vehicle, electric vehicle, because they never have before. And they don't want to say this, but often they don't know how to charge. They don't know if it drives like a regular gas vehicle. So we also provided events where residents came over and we provided test drives. We let them drive in the car with us. We also had them practice connecting and disconnecting the charger to the car so that people really felt at ease and comfortable with using the cars. And this really proved to be successful. And as a result, people signed up and saw the value of it. And I just really want to emphasize that, usually when you market a service, it's you're posting on social media, you're sending information, and that's helpful. but a lot of folks really disregard that information. They throw it away, and you really have to meet people where they are if you want them to be successful in programs like these.
Great, thanks. Carla, do you want to add anything? And then I'm going to open it up to the rest. You don't have to comment on every question, by the way. Don't feel compelled, but yeah, opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Our experience with outreach is pretty similar to Abigail's, but I would say our community coach program was a very successful method of outreach and training for the program, because we held regular meetings with the coaches, and they were even involved very early on in the designing of the program, where their feedback on the high fee actually inspired the team to look for ways to make the program more affordable. From there, our meetings would be focused on training them first on how to use the phone app and the vehicles themselves, so that they could teach other residents on how to do so as well. They had the opportunity to do so at our outreach events, and being that on-site support, like Abigail mentioned, the residents generally feel more comfortable speaking to someone in person instead of, calling for a customer service number. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. Sparky, Caroline, anything else you'd like to add here on the engagement side of things?
Just really quickly, you'll probably see a theme throughout my comments. Our system is a little bit different than the other two, in that it's more of a kind of vendor relationship than something that we run ourselves. So we didn't do any of the outreach. We really left that up to Gig and Electrify America through a program called SAC to Zero. But with that said, the other program that I mentioned, our community car share, is much like the system that Carla is running. And I know through talking with my colleagues, they did a lot of the same outreach that both Carla and Abigail were talking about.
Great. Caroline, anything?
Yeah, I can speak to the engagement in the planning study. Really, we ended up actually implementing 3 pilots, and the partnerships we developed during that planning study were really critical. For example, MioCar, self-help enterprises was extremely helpful. We were able to do surveys with the residents and focus groups. They also helped us kind of introduce us to the local experts. So when we faced challenges, finding a car sharing service, a commercial car sharing service that would operate our program, they really stepped up and were able to, help us forge a solution locally. And I may be able to talk later about that, about what we actually did with our nonprofit service.
Great. I see that a number of people in the chat. Just as a reminder, put your questions in the Q&A. I'm kind of following the chat as well, but put your questions in the Q&A, and we will definitely try to get to as many of the questions as you all have. I see that there's some interest in how it is you think that members are actually using the vehicles. And I know Caroline talked a little bit about that from her studies, but do you have a sense of how they're actually using the vehicles? The trip making, where they're going to, how often they use the service, anything, your thoughts about how folks are using the cars.
Are you, so I can, how are they using the car? I'm trying to look at the trip purposes here. I saw in another, we see that, on average, people are traveling kind of, the median is for a member's trip reservation is 37 miles. However, it's 16 to 84 miles. And the time they're using, typically 50 percentile is 3.5 hours. However, that can go up 75 percentile, 15.5, and then the low of 1.5. So we've got a range. And I can tell you that there is quite a range of, we asked members about their primary destination in our survey, and I'm just trying to find it here. Okay, so basically we were seeing a lot of family personal errands as their primary reason for reserving these cars. Medical second, school, shopping, social, recreational, and work related. We were really surprised about the work related. However, previous research showed that people often miss work or needed to take the day off work to help a spouse accomplish some like medical trips or things like that. So we did see a pretty significant share of work-related trips.
Any other thoughts from the other programs about sense of how people are using the vehicles? Anything?
I can add to Caroline's comments. Since the surveys that she's referring to were completed, we've held a few focus groups and listening sessions with residents since then. And we've learned, by just, of course, what they told us. One person mentioned that with gas prices being as high as they are, although he has a vehicle, he has a huge, I think it was like F-150 Ford truck. And it's very expensive for him to get to work and back because he has quite a commute. So he actually takes his truck to the Mio car, leaves his truck there and uses the Mio car to get to really travel the distance to work, and does that every day and saves money on gas. Another story that we heard, was you have to remember that these cars are, to some folks, really available in their front yard, right? Because they live at the housing property, right? So although they're available to everyone else as well, they're open to the public, to other folks in the community, it's very easy for the residents who live at our sites to use these vehicles. And there was a grandfather who told us that he reserves the car every morning for about an hour or a half hour to take his grandson to school, and then again in the afternoon around 3 o'clock to pick him up. So, to me, stories like that are so important, because if it wasn't for Mio car, how would he be doing that? So just a little bit about what we hear from folks.
And I could say one other thing is, a lot of people, unlike urban areas, travel more than 5 miles to get these cars. So, which shows that, there really is a need for, kind of more dispersed stations in the area, 29%.
Evelyn, not to overwhelm you with numbers, but the latest report that we have from GIG, at least in Sacramento, shows about 23% of people were using them to run errands, 17% for groceries, 13% for going to appointments, 10% for visiting friends, 10% for shopping, and 4% for hiking and outdoor activities. And another interesting thing is, since inception, the length of the trips has grown significantly. Started off in kind of the 20-mile range, and I think it peaked somewhere around the 80-mile range. It's slowly coming down now, but we're still trying to dig into why that happened. But we think it had a lot to do with the cost of rental cars going up, people getting more comfortable with the cars, and actually reserving them for multiple days to go on, little trips out of town, things like that.
Interesting. Yeah. Carla, thoughts? Anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I've definitely noticed pretty similar trips that our residents make. Ours is a little bit smaller, only 2 cars are available, but with my discussions with the residents, I know an elderly couple that books the vehicle the same day, same time, every week to do their grocery shopping. I've also had conversations with other residents that, unfortunately, their vehicle breaks down and they're very happy they have the option to book the electric vehicle when that happens. So I like to see the positive impact that it's having on our residents.
Yeah, great. So that's a perfect segue into sort of a question question around sort of measures of success, and how are you sort of evaluating whether the program is actually meeting the goals? And maybe you can say just a little bit about, kind of what do you look at? So we've already talked about some data and, kind of surveys. We already talked about, focus groups and talking to members. So, how you evaluating success and the kinds of data that you're looking at to do that. Who would like to start?
I can start, since ours is very simple. We don't have any hard and fast metrics in terms of how we analyze success. I think at the very high level, what we're looking for is growth and just the program participation, just seeing more members sign up. And me personally, the thing that I'm concerned with is community complaints. We get complaints through our 311 system about, folks that are upset that the gig cars are parked in front of their house, or, you name it. We've had every complaint you can think of. Over time, those numbers of complaints have really gone down to zero. I'd say in the last 9 months consistently, we've been near zero for complaints citywide on the program. It's not the most robust analysis, but when people are happy with a new program, to me, that is a measure of success. And again, just seeing that membership base growing over time is also an indication of success for me.
Yeah, great. Would like to, sure.
I can go. So I think I kind of highlighted some of these, but basically we wanted to measure that the people we intended to use the program are in fact using the program, that we wanted the people we intended to use the program to increase their accessibility, to report that they were able to go to more destinations and meet their needs over time. We also, wanted to look at the potential for reduced GHG, substituting battery electric vehicles for conventional vehicles, and also some of, reduced auto ownership resulting from the program.
Great.
I'd like to make a final comment on your question, Evelyn. I know that research and data and numbers and quantifying things is very important, especially if we receive funding for research. But I just want to really take a step back and note the importance of capturing and recognizing the success of just launching and starting this program and having it be available to folks who did not have this resource before. And I really see car sharing and programs like MioCar as a community resource. It is very much needed by residents. And if it wasn't for this program that now exists, this transportation mode would not be an option. And, in these communities, and most of us, it looks like we're working with low-income communities, adoption takes time. And the fact that we were able to, register X amount of users and have members that are using this on a regular basis, it's a huge success. And I just really want to note, and I hope that the state takes note, that you cannot measure success in a couple of years. You really have to make a long-term investment, especially since we're talking about residents and communities that have been historically disinvested in, right? Give us time to catch up and maybe make up for some of the disinvestment over the past decades.
Great.
Yeah, and I think it was extremely difficult to attract a car sharing vendor to the area. We ended up working with mobility development and developing a nonprofit service, MioCar, that now provides the service in our area.
So maybe we could come back to the vendor question and you can weigh in on that. I just want to make sure that Carla has a chance to talk, if she wants to, just about kind of these measurements of success. And then we can turn to the vendor issue.
I would have to agree with Abigail. I would think that the way we measure success is that the residents are using the vehicles. But at the same time, like Sparky said, we need to grow. We need to make more cars available because there is a need. So I say it's a success that there's a need, but we're still not there yet.
So, okay, there was a question that was the kind of an issue raised about the vendor, so that's fine. And then I do want to come back to what Carla just said in thinking about how we can scale up, right? So if we're in agreement that this additional service is a huge resource for communities, how can we think about, sort of what it will take to scale up? So let's start with the vendor. If there are any other comments about the sort of attracting a vendor that you all, sort of lessons that you've learned around that, and then we'll turn to the scaling up question. There's a rolling of eyes going on.
The reality is there's not many vendors out there. Before we partnered with Gig, I know we had been courted by Car2Go for a long time, and this was while we were still developing our car share policies and all of that. It's probably good that we never closed a deal with them, because soon after we were ready to go, they folded. So just, I think getting more vendors in this space is going to be helpful, but that's honestly a kind of a private sector issue that we have really no control over.
I think this is a situation where we might need different kinds of solutions in different areas. We offered really significant subsidies for a car sharing operator in the area that we wanted to serve, and we really had no responsive bids. Despite, we really went out and we had calls with people before. We worked pretty hard. And I just don't think in certain areas where this type of service is really needed, that private companies are going to be able to make the kind of profit that they need. So this is why we tried to come up with a local solution and ultimately developed a nonprofit. And we're hoping, over time, we are beginning to scale and try, locating in both rural and urban areas. Hopefully some of the urban revenue will help, some of the rural areas that may be more costly to provide service. And then also, developing partnerships with affordable housing developers who may be willing, to fund some of the costs of providing the service, and other groups that may want subscriptions. Ultimately, there may need to be some subsidies, and we are looking at what the costs might be. We don't know right now because it's still so early, but we'd like to compare what it costs for car sharing to what it costs for some transit services, and see if there's a case to be made.
Great. Any other comments about the vendor? And then I'm going to ask you, apparently there's lots of questions. You're in demand. So there's lots of questions from the audience. So anyway, first, any other comments about the operator? Okay, silence on.
I think the only thing that I would add to Carolyn's point is I agree 100%. The reason why we launched in the first place is because this huge subsidy came down from VW that basically paid for the 260 cars that were launched in Sacramento. Absent that, I have no idea if Gig would have been interested in, expanding to a second market at that time.
Yeah, so important points about thinking, maybe going back to what Seleta said, there are resources, at least in California right now. How can we take advantage of those to provide the incentives necessary?
Yeah, but those are temporary. I mean, they're initial startups. We need long-term funding.
Yeah, right. So that's, you're absolutely right. That's important. Okay, last question from me, at least for right now, is on the scaling up. I mean, there's a huge demand. We know there's a huge demand, for sort of these programs. What might be some of the barriers and ways that we can overcome those barriers to scale up our car sharing services? A big question. Who'd like to take a stab at it first?
I can go first.
Great, thanks, Abigail.
Yeah, so in the San Joaquin Valley, and I know other areas of the state, even if we received funding such as the one that Sparky mentioned, where you bought all these cars, we lack the basic infrastructure to make this a reality. In the San Joaquin Valley, most small communities do not have not one charging station, and the nearest one can be anywhere from 10 to 20 miles away, making it really difficult for folks to participate in a program like this, and even more difficult to consider purchasing an electric vehicle of their own. So at this point, in order to make programs like these successful, the state really has to begin investing in under-resourced communities and installing the infrastructure so that it's there and programs like these can flourish. Right now, if every time we talk about expanding MioCar, we have to talk about both purchasing the vehicles and developing the infrastructure, it makes it even more difficult. So I think we need to take a more proactive approach than we have been, and identify the areas that are in need, that in the San Joaquin Valley and across the state, and just start investing in the infrastructure first.
Great.
And if I could add something, it's, they have a lot of make-ready, utilities have make money to invest in make-ready. Make-ready is, you fix all the electricity so it can handle the charger. So in rural areas, we have a really hard time, qualifying for those, because they often want 10 consecutive spaces in a row. And that's really hard for affordable housing developments like self-help or locations in rural areas. And it's also not very supportive of car sharing, because car sharing really needs many locations spread out in an area. So that has been another kind of barrier that we've experienced in rural areas.
Well, and if I can add to Abigail's point, I would say that 100%. Luckily, there is some funding coming through both state and federal channels right now. We recently received a California Energy Commission grant to install chargers at 13 of our community centers and libraries in our low-income and historically disadvantaged communities. I think that's really what's gonna allow us to expand these programs into those areas, because absent that, the charging and parking are really the two biggest expenses that you have for doing this. So if we can at least get the chargers in there, once you're going out into the neighborhoods, parking costs are not so much. It's huge costs when you're talking the downtown areas, but also working with a great electric provider. I mean, we have the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, which is an awesome partner in this space, and they routinely get involved in helping us subsidize EVSC, roll out new programs. Just making sure that all of the different arms of government and quasi-government are on the same page is critical to making this happen.
Great. And Carla, last words on this question, and then we'll open things up.
Yes, so our vehicles are located on site. We currently have a lot where we can hold the 2 vehicles along with our charging station. And we do have enough space to have maybe 2 more cars. But again, we have 470 units or households. 4 vehicles is not enough. And if we wanted to expand, we'd have to run into the issue where can we put the additional cars? And I don't know if in LA, parking is an issue. And if we take a parking from a resident, I'm pretty sure that's going to cause mayhem. So it's a lot of planning. Yeah.
Great.
Evelyn, I'd like to add one last piece that's often overlooked. Yeah, so luckily for larger cities that have paid staff and folks that can look out for grants and resources, there's folks who can submit proposals and applications for these types of projects. But for most of the small communities that we work with, that's just not a reality. And often what's overlooked is the technical assistance needed to help a community go through this process. That part of the project is often unfunded, and organizations like Self-Help Enterprises are there to work with these communities and submit proposals and on their behalf. But again, with this often being an unfunded large task that often takes months to meet with the community, figure out what they want to do, the state can really help by investing in resources that pay for technical assistance by community-based organizations and planning orgs to do this work with communities on the ground and help them to be successful in their applications.
Great, thank you. You presented a great array of options. There's a lot of questions, so I'm going to channel those sort of questions to you all. The first one is from Aaron Caceres, and he asked, or she asked, can the panelists speak to the utilization of the services? Do you have a sense of how often the cars are out in service versus available for use? So when, when a member wants a car, can a member get a car?
Well, I can answer for our program. Recently, we have been hit very hard by the Bolt recall. And we have not been able to make the kind of, because of our users travel long distances, we have to recharge them. We just cannot make the kind of modifications that they've made in LA. So our vehicles right now are very heavily used. And it's been pretty tough. Just another uncertainty with electric vehicles.
Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
We've been hit with the Bolt recall as well. I mean, that's kind of one of the downsides of going with one model for your entire fleet. But it hasn't been horrible. Gig pivoted and made some really good choices to make sure that the cars were available as often as possible. We don't get metrics based on how available the cars are. Again, we kind of consider that proprietary information for the vendor, but just anecdotally, you can just pull up the website at any time and see how many of the 260 vehicles are available. They tend to move around a lot. In the initial days, a lot of those 311 complaints that I got were from neighbors not only upset that a car was parked in front of their house, but that the car was parked there for 3 days. And most of you probably know there's, statutes out there about parking. You have to move a car every 72 hours, things like that. That's not a problem anymore. These cars are turning over on a pretty regular basis, but we want that to happen even more.
Any other comments on this question? Okay. So Shauna Aloni, hi Shauna, asks, do any of these programs provide car seats or booster seats? And what about wheelchair friendly vehicles? And, in the Americans with Disability Act, so ADA, issues.
I can just answer quickly for MeoCar. People if they need a car seat, they're required to bring their car seat. We don't provide them. Also, we provide I'm not sure what they're called. I don't know, Abigail, if you remember, but for people who can't use their legs. Right now, we don't have ADA accessible vehicles, but we are hoping to secure, hand controls. Thank you, Creighton. We are hoping to secure an ADA vehicle and in the next year or so that would be able to load a wheelchair, and hoping to explore other funding options to secure that.
Yeah. Others? Car seats, wheelchairs.
No and no. They do provide bike racks on all of the cars. Haven't seen them used too much, but they are available. With a free floating system, I would love to see more accessible devices, but it would be really hard to manage that because the car can be in any location throughout the city at any point. So I'm not sure how you would manage that.
I'll just add that, like Caroline said, we do not have full ADA vehicles available. However, we do have a few vans that we purchased that are available for larger families or folks who need to take, who need a larger vehicle. And I know because I'm a member and a relatively frequent user myself, that in those vans, there is space to put a wheelchair in the back, also space to carry larger items whenever a bigger group is traveling. So we have used it for that purpose. So yeah, it helps.
Great. Any other comments about that issue?
I can't say that transit agencies are asking more and more about that when we work with transit agencies.
Okay. Let me turn to Aaron Baum's question. And he asks, I wonder if our panelists can speak a bit about the future and the business models or the public-private model that will need to be implemented for these programs to be sustainable and or grow. Thoughts about the idea model of a mobility wallet to provide for other zero-emission electric vehicle mode usage. Yeah.
A mobility wallet would be a great component to what we have today. I think at the end of the day, especially for the type of system that we have, just figuring out what makes the system sustainable for the provider is ultimately what's going to keep them around. But even then, as I mentioned, the system like Car2Go, it's a private entity. It's here today. We're not sure if it's going to be here tomorrow. Really, the only way to make this sustainable in the long term is for the cities or the CBOs to actually operate their own car share systems. And that's a pretty huge jump right now that I don't think too many jurisdictions really have the appetite for. So it's a hard nut to crack right now, but I think if we can develop a partnership model that shows long-term benefit. I mean, these are for-profit companies that shows a reasonable profit for them, but also ensures that these companies will stick around long-term. That's kind of the win-win, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and with regard to mobility wallets, it says, we're in Stockton, we're experimenting in South Stockton with electric car sharing with MioCar, new stations there, and then bike sharing. And we are hoping to kind of kickstart use of that with the mobility wallet that will launch shortly after those programs. However, we've got the problem with the mobility wallet experiments in California. They don't always have long-term funding availability for them. So I know I'm kind of go back on research, but I do think it's important to understand how effective these programs are and how worthwhile it may be to keep funding them.
Yeah. Any other comments about the business model aspect?
This is Creighton. You'll hear from me later, but I'm sure jumping ahead by can't resist this question here. So
Perfect. Fine.
I think what you're seeing here, right, is the state of California is only, in the first inning here, right? And we're starting to see patterns. There's, just listening to the folks on this call, you'll hear from me about Blue LA, but I'm hearing 4 different discrete models, and Caroline's done a little bit of work on this, but I think like what I saw in it is like definition of these categories, but not yet like comparison to Sparky's point of like, well, is there a model that's kind of more successful than the others, right? So like what we're at the stage of like kind of maybe having a recipe book, but do we know that everybody's favorite recipe is this one here? I don't think we're there yet, but certainly, to your point, Sparky, we see, the city of LA really starting to pick up investment directly as you heard from Seleta earlier, in the way you described, and certainly the Mealcar model, sort of, more of a grassroots nonprofit approach to a long-term home.
So I like the favorite recipe. So I like that, so we can, I think it is probably important to think about the favorite recipe, but also recognizing, I think it's something that one of you said previously, that favorite recipe might also vary by the type of place, right? So the Central Valley is certainly unique and very different than Los Angeles or Central Los Angeles, right, where Blue LA operates. And so, I think those are fair game to think about, right, that we should have a better understanding of both of those things. Okay, I'm going to turn, Creighton, you're welcome to stay on here. I'm going to turn to a question specifically for Sparky. And the question is, does Sacramento offer a special permit rate to gig and more broadly to the group? Do you foresee, and then this is to everybody, do you foresee zoning regulations and impact fees requiring developers to provide funding for stations and parking spaces, especially in housing developments? So a number of you talked about, certainly the various sort of parking issues. So let's start first with Sparky.
Sure. Oh my God. I was thinking more about the second half of that. Can you repeat the first half?
Okay. So does Sacramento offer a special permit rate to gig? That's the question specifically for you, and then we'll.
That's why I moved on so quickly. No. Gig has one rate for everyone. They don't subsidize anything. We do have programs where outside money is used to subsidize the users, but Gig doesn't do it on their own. And let me give you the caveat that when one of the components of our terms and conditions is when they develop these home zones, 20% of the area of the home zone, a minimum of 20% has to be in our low income or historically disadvantaged communities. Gig has exceeded that almost twofold. So, they have really good coverage. And in terms of any kind of zoning or impact fees, things like that, I know the city has already looked into more permissive things like density bonuses, parking reductions, things like that, if they participate in car sharing programs. But even those, I think we're still trying to wrap our heads around. There's one in particular that I can think of where a developer looked at our language and said, oh, if I participate in a car share program, I can put in, I think it was 80% of the parking required, something like that. I pushed back because, again, the things that Creighton and I just spoke about, that car share program is here today. Do we want to make long-term land use decisions based on a model that we're not sure is set yet? And to me, that building gets built without the parking, that's great. But moving forward 5 years from now, that benefit that was supposed to help that development may not be there. So to me, we still have to work out the kinks.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, so the second part of the question was about potential zoning regulations and impact fees requiring developers to provide funding for stations and parking. So thoughts about that? Silence in the Zoom room. but clearly an issue because a number of you raised this in my question about, sort of increasing, sort of scaling up operations. Parking certainly came up as an issue. So it's definitely something that you all, or most of you, have acknowledged as an issue.
So like in LA, and I, we could spend half an hour talking about this, right? But in LA, certainly the factor of parking was central in a lot of ways, right? The Blue LA program is all on street. It's all station based. So, to the point Sparky was making, when the operator Blink is making a decision about a hub, there's a $120,000, $150,000 one-time capital investment that is, somebody's going to pay for that parking space, whether it's the city with a continuous subsidy or eventually the operator. And so that, that point is pretty central to the sort of long-term negotiations that Seleta mentioned earlier. I don't want to get ahead of the city by providing specifics, but just to say that that's, it's a tool that the city has in their tool belt. This is city property. And I think in the case of LA, you're seeing that tool used.
And I guess just to be speculative, as I mentioned before, the two biggest costs for our car share partners are, the parking and the charging. Right now, the way it works in Sacramento is that Gig pays a deposit based on what we anticipate they're going to pay for parking for an entire year. So, I mean, they upfront put a huge deposit down, and then we do a quarterly check-in over time to see how much parking they've actually used. And these are metered spaces and time zone spaces. When you're just on the street in a residential area, you don't pay for parking anyway. So we true that up over time against what they've deposited. And if they use more, they pay the difference. If they pay less, we donate it back. I could see a conversation in the future if it comes to light that, we need to find more creative ways to keep the system around of should development help to subsidize what Gig is paying for that parking because they're providing a service for the people that live in those areas. That's a conversation yet to be had, but it's one of those, it's one of those arrows in the quiver that might make the system more profitable and keep your partner around longer.
So I'm going to ask one of you to respond to, there's a lot of questions. And so my apologies. It's great that there are all these questions. So clearly a lot of interest. I'm going to ask one of you to respond to a question, and then I'm going to let each one of you just have a quick final comments, anything that you want to highlight. Okay, so we'll do just a kind of a quick go around before we transition here. But someone wanted to know, can you explain how maintenance and recharging is done on a daily basis? So can one of you just explain for your program how that works, and then we'll do this lightning round.
Creighton, could you explain, since you're the ops?
As sort of just a general answer, I think that the easiest general answer is most of these programs prefer dedicated charging, right? So that it's the member's responsibility to plug that car back in at the end of their trip. You see that as common to Blue LA, to Mio Car, to the program in San Pedro. So free floating can be really tough for charging, right?
Yeah, free floating is a little different. These cars don't live in a specific place, so it's really up to Gig as the provider to do the maintenance. I believe they contract that out to a third party, but they have a whole rebalancing team, much like the scooters and bike share out there, to make sure that the cars are rebalanced throughout the city. They have started a new program to make their members more comfortable with charging, because it's to a disadvantage if a member uses a car, charges it all, or uses it all the way down to 10%, and now Gig has to take it off the system to charge it before they put it back. So now they're trying to encourage the members to actually charge the cars while they're using them, they give them the money to do that. And then the car stays on the system more often. So that's one way that they're dealing with it.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Okay, so a quick sort of lightning round, and Sparky, maybe you can, we'll just go in the order that you guys spoke before. So, any other comments you want to make, prompted by the questions or things that you want to highlight? Fair game.
I just love the program. I want to see it expand. I want to see it go into more cities. I think, much to Abigail's point, we've got to get charging in there. We've got to really take advantage of the current federal administration and get more level 2 and DC fast chargers out there to help support just the proliferation of EVs that are coming out right now. And I think as a result, these programs will become profitable, I guess is the word, but at least sustainable. And I want to see our program here in Sacramento stay and grow. It's become, like I said, an integral part of our transportation ecosystem. And I think the more people that learn about it, the more comfortable they'll get with either shedding a car or at least trying an EV, and if they decide to buy a car, going that route for their purchase.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Abigail.
Yeah, I think I'll just end by saying that, we're very excited to have been part of the launch of MioCar. And, there is just such huge potential for growth here. I think that in the first, 2-3 years, we've seen just a small portion of what can happen. Our dream at Self-Help Enterprises, our goal is, that one of the residents that lives in our properties can jump in a MioCar in Dinuba, California, and drive to Fresno, and pick up, some other mode of transportation there, and then maybe, get on the Amtrak train to get to Sacramento, right? Like a seamless transportation from point A to where you have to get. And in order to make that happen, we must invest in the infrastructure. We must prioritize disadvantaged communities and community-based organizations and partnerships like these to really make this a reality. So I'm excited to keep talking about this topic and engaging in this work.
Great, thanks. Caroline.
I just encourage kind of the state and how they're designing subsidies for EVSE and Make Ready to think about, investing really not just for personal vehicles, infrastructure for personal vehicles, but also what works for car sharing, which means, fewer charging stations at a lot more locations and central locations.
Great, thanks. Carla.
I just want to say it was a pleasure to be a part of this discussion, especially as the smallest and newest program on this panel. I know we have a lot more to learn and strive for, but it is completely worth it because of the positive impact it has had on our low-income communities. So thank you again for inviting me to participate.
So I want to thank all of you. Abigail, I could see comments about, your plug for a seamless transportation, kind of your vision for that is certainly something that I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm as being kind of this objective. And I greatly appreciate your involvement in these programs and the kind of insight and enthusiasm that you bring to your work. So thanks in general for your work and for your participation in this panel. I really appreciate it a lot. I know I learned a lot, so thanks very much. So I would now like to turn things over to Madeline Brosen, who's going to be moderating the last part of our event this morning. And I'm going to go back to sharing a screen. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone for their comments and all of our attendees. There's, as Evelyn mentioned, there's way more questions that we could get to today. So I think there's a lot more to talk about. I just want to briefly introduce our last speaker, Creighton Randall. Creighton is the CEO of Mobility Development Group, which launched in 2018. As you kind of heard from our speakers, it has hands in a number of these programs, and I think is a real great expert in terms of understanding different considerations in different places. So Creighton's going to talk a little bit about Blue LA, which is kind of where Seleta Reynolds started talking about, and also kind of give a sense of where the industry is going. So Creighton, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Maddie. Give me one sec to just share my screen here. Oh, hold on a second. All righty. Everybody see my screen here? All right. Can you see that?
Yep, where we can.
All right. So as Maddie mentioned, we are at Mobility Development involved in a number of programs, EV car sharing principally, but also e-bike share and bike libraries and volunteer transportation. I've been in this business about 15 years now, almost 15 years, and we've got a team of 17 that's approaching almost a century of experience in this world. So yeah, so I'm just going to go through and talk about Blue LA and some of the themes that you're hearing here sort of continued. And if we've got some time, I'm going to move on to investments and more broadly, and go from there. So, so in terms of, oh, I'm on a video call.
I saw something amazing.
Okay, I got it. I need you to go downstairs right now. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. So sorry about that. So, all right. So going back to the baking analogy, right? We've got a lot of ingredients in Blue LA. As Maddie mentioned, this work started in 2018, but was really had about 3 years of planning before that. And so you've got a number of cooks in the kitchen, right? You've got the State Air Resources Board, you've got LADOT and Department of Water and Power at LA. And you've got the mayor's office involved to kind of behind the scenes push this project forward, and a significant investment early in phase 1 with Bolloré, phase 2 with Blink Mobility, which you'll hear more about later. And so the early kind of cooking, the early baking here was around some of the stuff that just takes time, to the point that Abigail made. The RFP, the evaluation of the RFP, the negotiation, the city's creation really through support from the mayor's office of a Tiger team with 25 people in it, a number of community forums with a steering committee, and then 2.5 years of construction. So from 2017 through 2019, early 2020, the results of the program were messy. There's a lot of smoke coming out of the kitchen. It was starting to smell really good, but nobody had really tasted it yet, right? So we see some early results from phase 1, through just about up until the start of the pandemic. But where we're really seeing this thing flower and blossom is really in the last year. So I'll touch on that a little bit at the end. So this Tiger team, again, lots of cooks in the kitchen here, but this is what it takes in a big complex city like Los Angeles. When you're doing all on-street construction, it is going to take years to build these systems out. So the first phase of Blue LA was 40 stations. You're talking about 200 individual parking spaces. These spaces have to be next to each other in a row of 5, right? So you can imagine all the sorts of things, whether it's street trees or fire hydrants or curb cuts, ADA concerns that can present challenges for placing a station, and not to mention power, right? Steering committee also is another cook or set of cooks in the kitchen. So in phase one of the project, right, you had, I think, and I'll just go back a slide, right? You've got these sort of three ingredients here. You've got this very hands-on partnership model that Seleta described earlier, a little bit different from what you heard from Sparky. You've got this kind of principle of social justice that kind of, particularly in phase one, kind of you saw coming through in terms of the steering committee's participation in this program. So you've got community-based organizations that come to the table very much used to maybe the city being on the other side of the table, thinking about concerns around gentrification or displacement or extraction from communities that they represent. And so it took a lot of time to have everybody at the table comfortable with each other. That was a big part of the first phase. Again, something that we kind of are benefiting from now in phase two. And then you have this essentially this clean tech investment, significant private sector investment in LA in a way that probably is not possible in some of these other communities that you heard about. So as I mentioned, the steering committee was essential, important to have in the kitchen. We started with 3 community-based organizations in Koreatown, in South LA, and in Central LA, Salif, Kiwa, and Trust. In phase 2, this is now expanded to 7 organizations. These steering committee members play more than just a token role. In phase 1, they were very much involved in that sort of almost negotiation of a community benefits agreement to sort of extend the reference to social justice, right? And that has moved. We've seen that move in phase 2 into more a full embrace of the system and really a focus on expansion. The steering committee is seeing the results of the program. They're seeing the impacts of the program, and they want to see it grow. They want to see it grow in the communities that they represent. So a little bit about the pricing, because I know that came up a lot in the sort of previous section. So this is priced by the minute, like a lot of other more contemporary shared mobility models. So it's, you know, if you're sort of paying by the minute, it's $9 or $12 an hour, depending on whether you're a community member, meaning you're income qualified, or you're paying a standard membership rate. But what's been very popular consistently is these packages, right? So a 3 or a 5 hour block of time, $15 or $5 an hour in a 3 hour package is a pretty good deal. And we're seeing that again is very, very popular. It is station-based, but one way. So you can pick the car up from any one station and return it to any one station, very much like dock-based bike sharing, if you're familiar with that. But you can't reserve it in advance the way you can with traditional car sharing. So there was a question, I think, from one of the attendees about the tension between one way versus round trip. Now, this data I'm sharing with you is phase 1. It's before Blink Mobility took over the program in phase 2. So this is an incomplete data set, but we sort of cut the data off at the start of the pandemic because there were some significant challenges the program incurred during the pandemic, of course. So we saw a settling out of user behavior. Some members use the program as round trip. They use it like traditional car sharing. And some program members use the service perhaps the way they might use Gig in Sacramento or Car2Go. So it's a mix. We're seeing those 3 hour trips, those blocks of time as being particularly popular with community members, with a low income qualified membership base. This should not come as a surprise, right? People are maximizing their time using the program, they're cost sensitive. So again, you're seeing community members, low income community members using the service more like traditional car sharing and less like a Car2Go or a Gig program. And I should mention that in phase 1, income qualified members represented just over 60% of the utilization program and about half of the membership base. And the way we define low income is based on other standards in the city or county, whether you can qualify for food stamps or energy assistance or a range of other social services. So what we're really excited about is where this program is kind of taken off since Blink Mobility took over. So as Seleta mentioned, we've had two different operators. We had Bolloré, which is a French company at the beginning, really helped to kind of set this model up, introduced us to this model, did the early work of construction and introduced the initial fleet. Blink came in the pandemic, acquired Blue LA Carsharing, and proceeded to kind of refresh, right, both the app and the cars. And with the introduction of those Chevy Bolts at the start of last year, membership took back off again and utilization took back off. Because of impacts from the pandemic, the program started a sort of a reduced scale. Started back up after a brief shutdown with about 30 cars and has kind of slowly grown to 60 vehicles. Unfortunately, with the Chevy recall that was mentioned earlier, it's been really tough to get Chevy Bolts, impossible for the better part of a year now. So the program has, as a result of the recall, been a little bit hobbled, and we're seeing utilization kind of top out or max out. The cars are just, there's a scarcity of vehicles available. So it's a good problem to have, but Blink is committed to really ramping up to that original scale again of 100 cars, and then moving beyond that to a phase 2 goal of 300 vehicles. So we're gonna see this program grow really, really fast, and Blink is laser focused right now on that expansion, both the construction and the fleet expansion as well. Not surprisingly, you see when there's a scarcity of vehicles, we've seen so far in this 2021 data that folks that are more mobile, folks that are more affluent are going to have easier time finding a way to get a vehicle. They're going to have more flexibility in the schedule. Since you can't book these cars in advance, that means we're seeing a decrease in utilization among low-income users. So for this period of scarcity, only about half of the trips are being taken by what the program defines as community members. So again, with this infusion of cars back into the system, with the growth of the system, with the support of the steering committee, we hope to see those patterns go back to kind of that 60-70% usage coming from low-income users. We do know, though, that even in this period, income qualified members are more likely to use the service more heavily, but they're also more likely to never use the service at all. Community membership is $1 a month. Doesn't have a big impact on your wallet to have that dollar charge, versus standard membership is $5 a month. So people are more likely to set aside membership or stop becoming stop using the service for a time if they're not paying that community membership rate. So I talked a little bit, went fast through phase 1 and phase 2. So I just want to pause on this for a second to give you a sense of what we mean with phase 1. So phase 1 is, again, Bolloré, the French company, 40 stations, 100 cars. Phase 2 is growth from 40 stations to 100 stations, growth from 100 cars to 300 cars. We're just at the start of phase 2. We're seeing great results, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of people taking to the bolts in particular and really using the service at record levels. But we're just getting started on construction, and we're just getting started on seeing Blink's expansion to that sort of phase 2 scale. Both Bolloré and more significantly so, Blink now have made huge financial commitments to this program. This gets into the kind of activist investment that Seleta mentioned, but you're seeing the city holding a certain set of tools, but the lion's share of the investment still in phase 2 coming from the private sector. So time's short. I do want to get to overall patterns here. I think the biggest thing I can leave you with is that sort of first inning analogy, right? State has put maybe, in terms of projects actively underway, 30 to 40 million into these projects so far. There's another maybe 20, 30 million in the hopper. This is really gonna just take off. It's scheduled through the governor's proposed budget this year to see 420 million over 4 years' time. And so this cookbook that we're working with is going to get a lot more use. You're going to see a lot more people working on and perfecting and sharing these different recipes and maybe picking a favorite. But the more we see these programs trialed in different places, and the more we see the programs move into those sort of long-term homes that Caroline was describing, the more we're going to see what works and what doesn't. So the state has 3 buckets of how they fund these projects. And those are those sort of names, those labels at the bottom. There's going to be a lot of overlap. You know, I think the thing from Blue LA's perspective, from the city, from LADOT's perspective that I keep coming back to is the city of LA has 26% of the disadvantaged communities in the state, the city alone. LA County is 53%. So this is above all else where these programs are going to grow. Not to discount the Central Valley. The San Joaquin Valley is disproportionately burdened and certainly also deserves its fair share of the stake. And our organization provides direct operational and technical support to the program that you heard from Caroline and Abigail. But this is where the most significantly impacted folks in the state are from a pure number standpoint. So this is going to change things, right? And the city is going to, more likely than not, ramp up the investment with state support. So just want to kind of leave you with that. It's not all about the money, but it's a significant driver of success, right? There's also such an infusion of resources that we should be looking at replication, not just with what we've done so far. We need also to be looking at other models out there. One of them that we've been showing attention to lately is e-bike libraries. We think there's a lot of potential here. We're seeing community-based organizations lead these projects. We're seeing a lot more affinity, particularly for Black and Brown-led organizations to just getting people bikes. There's just so much lower of a barrier to somebody having a bike for themselves, and ownership is more fungible, right? With an e-bike. So there's some work that's live right now. I don't know if we can actually, if folks can click on the links in this slide deck here, but maybe we can drop them in the chat. This stuff is growing very quickly, so we're excited about this sort of idea of replication beyond just the models that are in the cookbook, but really, you know, cooking with new recipes as well.
Thank you so much, Creighton, for that. You know, I think that as a research center that focuses on Los Angeles and the kind of greater region, it's a really exciting kind of place to be. And so with that, I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of try to summarize a couple of the themes that we heard here today and wrap us up today. So one of the things that we heard about is how, you know, this electric car share is a real vital component of the transportation ecosystem. And I think where Creighton landed also is that there are more and more options that are coming online, really thinking about them as a community-led investment. I think in the NeoCar example, Caroline pointed out that it wasn't just that the system was dropped down, but really before they started doing this, it was, you know, a community-based planning study that really looked to figure out what paths that people wanted to explore to increase access. But I think, as we heard from everyone, it's a place of uncertainty. There's a lot of market turbulence. There has been a lot of market turbulence in car share. There are not many vendors, but we're still seeing a growth in these programs. So kind of as Seleta Reynolds started us out with, I think it's a bit difficult for cities to be in place, but to be able to try to figure out how to be a little uncomfortable with the uncertainty in this space because there's a huge potential to use these investments to be uplifting communities and households that have been historically left behind, that are having disproportionate burdens of transportation, and that people are really using these vehicles in ways that enhance their lives. I think that a lot of our programs really talking about success in terms of that you have something, that people are having something that benefits them. And this is really important. I think that in the transportation space, we can get somewhat bogged down on things like, oh, is it reducing car ownership? Is it reducing VMT? And I think those things are happening to a certain extent. But I do want to uplift something that Caroline mentioned, is that new VMT for low-income households is good VMT. It is the ability to get to the things that they need and to be able to give them some autonomy, that you're less constrained about the choices that you want to make because you have a transportation option that can get you really far. I think that the last thing is that, we are kind of in a little bit of a balancing act in terms of these programs in California. They're still described as pilots. They are trying to figure out how they get a sustainable source of funding going forward. But at the same time, there's major investments, putting electric vehicle charging into the ground is not something, that is just equivalent to what we might think as tactical urbanism. It's not paint, right? It's not something that's very temporary. So there's kind of a balance between thinking about these as pilots, but also the major investments. Because in the end, I think what transportation can really do is give people access to opportunities. And we want to think about ways that really center those who have been historically left out of that. So with that, I just want to thank all of the people that have stuck around today. I want to thank all of our speakers this morning: Evelyn Blumenberg, Sparky Harris, Creighton Randall, Seleta Reynolds, Caroline Rodier, Abigail Solis, and Carla Velasco. Really enriched our event today, giving us so much knowledge. I want to thank our two sponsors that really helped us to spread the word and support the program today. So the California Resilient and Innovative Mobility Initiative, part of the University of California Institute of Transportation Studies, and the Luskin Center for Innovation, one of our partners here at the Luskin School of Public Affairs. If you liked today's content and you'd like to stay involved, please make sure that you follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, that you sign up for our UCLA Lewis Center listserv. We really are excited to have this event because we want to continue working in this space. We've been doing some research with the Blue LA program that we're looking forward to sharing in the future, and other topics to that point. So thank everyone for coming today, and we hope to see you again soon.